So thank you all for being here. This is the Reaching Home Missoula 10-year plan to end homelessness annual update. I'm Emily Armstrong, she, her pronouns, and I'm the Reaching Home manager with the city, with the Community Planning, Development, and Innovation Department in the Community Development Division. So I am going to move forward with our update. Today we'll have, I'll give an update and then we'll have a panel of experts and I'll go through that agenda more in just a minute. I want to start just with a big thank you to the mayor, to city council, to county commissioners for being here and for your commitment to this work. It's really important, and I can't tell you how helpful it is for me and how much I value having your support and your engagement as we try to tackle this as a community. So thank you. And then I also want to just let everyone know this update is being recorded. We do intend to have it available for public viewing after the fact and are working on a plan to disperse that out to the public. All right, so I'm going to start my screen share. There we go. Setting up my screen here. Okay, so I do want to start us off today with a land acknowledgement to recognize the stolen Indigenous lands that we stand upon. So the beginning of this is a recommendation from the CSKT Cultural Committee. So I'm going to read that first, and then the second portion, it just really reflects our particular positionality in this work and on this land. So I'm just going to take a minute to read through this. We, as members of the homelessness and housing system in Missoula, acknowledge that we are in the homelands of the Salish and Kalispel people. Today, we offer our respect for their history and culture, for their ancient and continuing presence in this landscape, and for the path that they have shown us in caring for this place for the generations to come. We recognize the ways in which systems of government have contributed to the disconnection of Indigenous peoples from these lands and their families' culture and heritage. It is our responsibility as individuals and as a collective to acknowledge the white supremacist culture underlying our practices and to be accountable to demanding respect for tribal sovereignty and Indigenous cultures and the needs and perspectives of Indigenous peoples. So I just invite you to take a few moments to reflect on that and consider your own land acknowledgement. If we were using chat function, I would say that you could put your land acknowledgement in the chat, but in lieu of that, just take a moment and consider how you yourself acknowledge the lands that we stand upon. And then in that same vein, I want to move us into just ways to engage with Indigenous communities in Western Montana. So I think it's really important in doing land acknowledgements and recognizing the stolen lands that we stand on, that we are not only performing that acknowledgement, we're also acting in our engagement. And so these are some ways that you may engage with organizations that are run by Indigenous folks that are pushing Indigenous advocacy and Indigenous rights, and just ways that you can invest more in that work and in our Indigenous neighbors. So there will be a link to this same content in a PDF in the chat so that you can actually click the links and engage with it. I know it's challenging when it's a PowerPoint. So yes, I encourage you to take some time to do that today. I do also want to recognize, before I dive deeper into the update and the agenda, that we lost a neighbor over the weekend who was part of the Missoula Coordinated Entry System. This is what we work every day to avoid and are only going to work harder to honor her memory. So I just invite you again to take a moment to reflect on the lives we've lost in our community as we work to better serve our neighbors. Thanks so much. So now moving forward with the agenda, this is kind of the plan for the day. We're going to do the welcome and overview, which I've kind of mostly done at this point. And then we'll move forward to the update from me, the Reaching Home manager. And then we'll have the panelist, or the panel of panelists, which is the part I'm most excited about. We have some really amazing people with us today, representatives from our homelessness and housing system who are just really great advocates and engaged in this work and have a lot of great things to share with you. So then we'll wrap it up at the end, and that's kind of the plain and simple plan for the day. So moving more into the update, I want to start us out with this person-first language grounding. I think it's really important in talking about homelessness or really talking about any sort of social issue that we approach it from a person-first perspective. So what I mean when I say person-first, and this may be familiar to many of you, it may be totally new, I just mean language that makes you think about the person involved, as opposed to a specific aspect of their situation. So really changing the narrative so that it's about the person and not perceiving their experience as a moral failing. So what I mean by that is language such as people without housing. So you'll see just even the structure of that phrase is people is the first word. So it's really centering the individual, centering the humanity of the experience and not the experience itself. So people without housing, you'll often hear a person experiencing homelessness. That's kind of become the industry common term. And also it's starting to shift. There's an important distinction to recognize between the terms house and home. Most of the folks that we work with here in Missoula are from Missoula, and so they do have a home. They would tell you it's Missoula. Many would also consider their less traditional dwelling space to be their home. Even if to us it doesn't look like a house, it is still a home to them. So in many spaces, we're trying to shift from saying that folks are without homes to understanding that in many cases they're without houses. At the same time, there are folks living in Missoula who may self-identify as homeless. And so while I'm asking you to change your language and say person first and say unhoused or houseless, there are individuals who would tell you they identify as being homeless. And so what that really points to is at the end of the day, it's just best to ask. Ask someone how they prefer to be identified or how they identify themselves. I recognize that's not always possible. And so in that case, I'm kind of presenting you with some alternatives: people without housing, person who is unhoused or houseless. You'll hear me use a variety of these throughout the presentation today. There are some terms that I specifically am trying to encourage folks to move away from, and the homelessness community as a system in itself is trying to share that same message. And the biggest terms that I hear most often in this vein are transient and the homeless. And the term transient really carries this connotation of someone being lazy, someone who is just passing through, not our problem, someone who chose this as just the life they wanted to live. And to be honest, it's just not true. The connotations of this word are not rooted in fact, they're not rooted in reality. And so it just really does a disservice to our work to be using a term that doesn't actually reflect the individuals that we're working with. Similarly, the homeless is a really generalized term. So it really groups everyone into one broad category. And the experience of homelessness is extremely individualized and a really unique experience for each person. How they got there, their experience while being unhoused, the supports or resources they're looking for to get out of that situation are very different person to person. And so again, generalizing with terms like the homeless really does a disservice to our work. Because it doesn't take into account all of the different needs that are at the table and that we're trying to serve in what we're doing. Some other creative options I've heard are urban camper, curbside community. I'm not saying any of these is like the one and only term, but some other ways to just identify folks. And again, when possible, it's best to just ask someone how they choose to be identified. But person first language is kind of the goal in everything we're doing. So from there, move into the actual update. So the 10-year plan to end homelessness, it had 3 phases. We are in phase 3. The 10-year plan started in 2012 and it ends in 2022, which is just next year. So we're at the end of the plan. Phase 1 was really kind of an action phase, creating rapid, visible, and meaningful change. So starting the ball rolling. Phase 2 is really building a coordinated system to end homelessness, which we did. We have the Missoula Coordinated Entry System now. And phase 3 is kind of looking at what we've done, making adjustments to ensure sustainability. So reflecting on achievements, challenges, seeing where the gaps are, updating based on best practices, which are always evolving, and considering how to sustain progress. And I really here want to point out what we mean when we say end homelessness. So what we're referring to is this idea of functional zero. And I think we in the homelessness industry just assume everyone knows what we're talking about, but that's not the reality. So a functional zero is when the number of people who are houseless in our community, whether sheltered or unsheltered, is no greater than the monthly housing placement rate for folks who are unhoused. So basically, the input equals the output. That's what we're saying when we're talking about ending homelessness. We recognize homelessness is a very complex social challenge. I'll talk about that more later. And so there's a lot of work to be done. It may not be our reality, although in a dream world it would be, that homelessness will just never be an experience. But we are really aiming towards homelessness being an experience that's rare, brief, and one time only, and that functional zero benchmark. So the 10-year plan goals, I'm not going to read through these for the sake of time. There just isn't time to do it, but I will point out just a few of them. And there is a PDF of this slide that we'll put in the chat that you can open up at a later time to read through it if you want. The 10-year plan is also posted on the city website, so you can read the whole 10-year plan with these goals and much more information included if you would like to. So just a few that I want to point out that kind of frame what we'll be talking about is the single point of entry. So the Missoula Coordinated Entry System was created. We have 2 main access points right now, the Poverello Center and 211. So some progress there. Pools of money, which we have our Centralized Housing Solutions Fund, which is used for diversion. We'll talk more about that later too. More affordable housing and more housing that is affordable. And currently we have in development the Trinity and Bellagio projects that are aimed towards that particular goal. Landlords are part of the solution, which we're working to address with the Landlord Liaison and Property Partner Program at Homeward. And we actually have our Landlord Liaison in our panel later today. And then emergency winter shelter remains available. So just the ongoing amazing work at the Poverello Center to make sure that we still have that resource in our community. So lots packed into all these goals and lots that we've accomplished, which is really gratifying at this point. So I'm going to move us on to data just for a minute. So a little bit of data to kind of ground this work, ground this conversation. I want to start by saying that homelessness is extremely challenging to measure in quantitative data. Numbers don't paint the full picture of the experience of being unhoused. It's fluid, it's rapidly changing, and you simply just can't capture it with a number. That said, we do have a few different quantitative data sources that we use to help us understand the landscape of homelessness in our community and help us kind of balance out the qualitative narrative data that's also so important to the work that we do. So this is one of those data sources, the point in time count. This is a national data source that every community completes. It's part of a HUD requirement. So we complete this on an annual basis. And the narrative that this data is telling is the number of individuals who were housed on a single night in January. So that's important to understand the context of what these numbers are. The next slide will be very different, and I'll share the narrative of that one as well. So the point in time count is just one night in the middle of winter. It doesn't paint the full picture of who experiences homelessness in Missoula or how many folks are unhoused throughout the year. If you did a point in time count in August, it might look very different than one in the middle of winter, largely because in the winter time, folks move inside and we may not have them out and about in our community as much as we would in August. It's an imperfect data source. It is a data source nonetheless, and we try to balance it out with many others as we're looking at the landscape of what being unhoused looks like in Missoula. I also want to point out these statistics include data from Hamilton. The way our state shares our data, Missoula and Hamilton are aggregated. I don't have an ability to disaggregate them right now, although we're working on it. But I will say the percentage of these numbers that is Hamilton data is likely quite low. So the next data source is from our Missoula Coordinated Entry System. So like I mentioned, this system was created in 2017. So that's a caveat off the bat to understanding what this data looks like. This data comes from the Homelessness Management Information System, HIMIS. And the narrative of this data is that the number of individuals or families who had an experience of being unhoused for any length of time during any given year that's listed here. So very different narrative than the point in time count narrative, which was just one night. This is looking at anyone who had any experience for any length of time over the course of that year. Missoula Coordinated Entry System, like I said, began in 17, so there was much less data in 17. We didn't have the same capacity. We didn't have folks as trained up as they are. We had far fewer agencies signed on to the system. It was just budding. So our capacity for collecting data was much lower, which is why you'll see the numbers in 17 and 18 were much lower. That's not necessarily the total number of folks who had an experience of being unhoused during those years, but it is, a reflection of the human entry capacity at that time. Also important to recognize that the 2020 data was deeply impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And again, the capacity of agencies to be entering data at the same frequency and with the same efficacy as they would in a typical year that wasn't impacted by a pandemic and closures and all of the millions of factors that made the last year really challenging. So again, data is really important, also really important to really understand what you're looking at and the narrative of the stories that the data is telling. I will also say, quantitative data doesn't tell the full story of how someone became unhoused, the upstream factors. It also doesn't tell us what they need to get into a stable situation. So it's very important for all of us who are in this work and for the community as a whole to understand that we also need to be collecting stories and narrative and understanding the real needs and the real factors, because we can't solve anything without knowing the upstream and the needs. So those are some data snapshots. And now I want to move us into some of the many countless highlights from the last 9 years of the plan. Like I said, these are just some of them. There are many more. So these are just the ones that I get to shout from the rooftops today. There are currently 38 agencies signed on to the Missoula Coordinated Entry System. So that's pretty significant, and I'm in conversations with others as we speak about signing on. That is 38 agencies who have decided they want to be part of ending homelessness in Missoula and want to be part of this work and are committed, sending staff to meetings, engaging with everything we're doing, going to an annual workshop, just investing their time and their energy into this work. 90+ individuals are trained in the Missoula Coordinated Entry System. So this system involves a database, it involves a ton of coordination, lots of conversation, really particular details. And so we've devised a training so that anyone who begins working with our system, any staff who get onboarded or shift positions in their organization, or when a new organization signs on to the system, we can train folks so that everyone is operating from the same manual and we can really have stronger data and a more coordinated system. Cornerstone is an MHA property, supportive housing apartments for folks with very low incomes. The units are prioritized for frequent users of the city's emergency response system, part of the FUSE program. So currently 11 out of 12 apartments are leased. Cornerstone opened in 2020 at the end of the year, and this is a huge win for our community to be able to provide stable and supportive housing for folks who really need it. The YWCA and the Missoula Interfaith Collaborative opened the Meadowlark for families and domestic violence survivors. This just happened, hot off the press. Families have just started moving into the shelter as of Sunday, I believe. And it's just a huge win for our community to have such a dedicated, truly beautiful space, dignified, safe location for families who are experiencing homelessness and survivors who are trying to stabilize and recover from domestic violence. Just really thankful for all that brings to our community. Listening sessions with lived experts. So Reaching Home has started doing a lot of work in partnership with lived experts who have experienced or are experiencing our homelessness system. So the folks who really know what it's like, they know the ins and outs, they know that what doesn't work, they know what does work, they know when they feel supported and when they don't, and they can provide real-time feedback and suggestions to us. You know, I really believe that the people closest to the challenge are the closest to the solution. And so it's really important that we start bringing these experts to the table. Without it, we're losing this whole big, wide array of expertise that can help us really change the landscape of how we're addressing this in our community. There are 20+ staff, this is a huge win, at weekly case conferencing to review the by name list. So this is just one of the case conferencing spaces. We have 4 spaces where staff gather on various bases, weekly, bi-weekly, to discuss individuals who are experiencing instances of being unhoused by name, individually. They're doing care coordination, they're discussing who knows this person, who can provide support, what resources can we offer. Just every single week, spending their time just really dedicating their energy and their resources to supporting all of these folks in our community by name. And I just think it's really powerful that we have so many folks in our community doing that work. So really grateful to see how many people are showing up at that table from, you know, those 38+ agencies who are part of our system. Our Centralized Housing Solutions Fund. So this is a diversion fund intended to divert folks away from the homelessness housing system. So folks who maybe need just like a one-off gap funding to get into a rental apartment or moving costs or a variety of different needs that can provide just that quick one-touch support so they don't actually ever have to enter the system. And so far it's supported 56 individuals. So we're really grateful to have that resource in our community. The emergency winter shelter operated by the Poverello Center has served 509 individuals this year. The emergency winter shelter was a much larger effort this year in response to the COVID pandemic. Typically, emergency winter shelter has been housed at the Salvation Army and has just been an overnight space with much slimmer capacity. This year, it had a capacity of 150. It was housed at the Johnson Street Community Center, and it was open 24/7 to make up for the lack of warming spaces around town that would typically be open, and to make up for the decreased capacity at the Poverello Center's Broadway shelter. So huge, huge resource for our community during COVID-19. And on its biggest night, it supported 137 people, which is almost at full capacity. So clearly a need in our community. And you can't talk about emergency winter shelter without talking about the non-congregate shelter that we brought up for, again, a COVID-19 response. That space served 283 individuals so far. It's actually currently still open, and helped permanently house 10. So the non-congregate shelter was erected so that folks who were identified as positive or a close contact of someone who was positive had a safe space to quarantine and isolate if they didn't have their own safe space to do so. And so this meant that anyone in a shelter or in one of our other spaces who was in a congregate setting, who was identified as needing to quarantine or isolate, could go to this space and have a safe space to do so without impacting the folks around them. So truly critical in making sure that our shelters could operate during COVID and that our homelessness system was able to stay strong throughout the whole pandemic. Our temporary safe outdoor space has successfully supported 53 residents thus far in a variety of things, from finding housing to just getting identification documents, getting into university. There's a lot going on at that space, and we're really learning from that model as we go. It's been very successful thus far. And then Reaching Home launched our quarterly newsletter in partnership with the United Way. So we're really grateful for their support in being able to communicate better with you all, with the community. That's something I'm really focused on, is trying to bring the community much more into our work and be able to communicate and have a feedback loop to hear from you about what we're doing, what's working, what's not. Okay, so these highlights demonstrate the huge strides we've made in building systems to address homelessness in Missoula. And I just want to take a step back to dig into the challenge at hand. So what is homelessness, and how can that understanding shape our approaches? Homelessness is complex. Bottom line, it's extremely complex. It is not a simple social challenge to solve. It is comprised of many other social challenges that intersect and all impact the experience of being unhoused. To name a few: racial inequality, childhood trauma and family conflict, lack of housing that is affordable, the criminal justice system, lack of mental health and addiction treatment services, poverty, domestic violence, lack of affordable health care, stagnant wages, rural inequity. And like I said, that's not all of them. So clearly a lot at play and not possible to address with simple solutions. We need to be very intentional about what we're devising. To paint a few examples of what this can look like in reality, maybe an individual has a privileged upbringing, a reliable family support system, and even has the privilege of attending college. They get a job and find a rental apartment. The job pays minimum wage, and they live in a community where they have to pay 70% of their salary to their rent. Then their landlord increases their rent by $200 a month. Suddenly, they have to choose between having 4 walls and a roof and eating a meal each day. The same happens to an athlete who gets injured and can't afford the medical payments required for surgery and recovery. Suddenly, they're evicted for non-payment. There are hundreds of these scenarios. I just encourage you to take a minute to chat with some of your neighbors. They'll tell you. This is unfortunately not an uncommon reality in our community or in really any community across the country right now. In another instance, the story may be of a child who experiences domestic violence. Without adequate affordable mental health care to learn how to heal from that pain, they turn to substances to cope. They leave the violent situation with a parent who sustains a family of 3 on minimum wage. Eventually, the child is old enough to work. They're still using substances and still haven't addressed the trauma, and their use gets in the way of their work. Their boss fires them, for which their parent kicks them out, and now they're without a home, without any pay, and without mental health care or addiction treatment services, expected to solve the situation on their own. These stories tell a narrative of survival. There are many reasons that an individual may become houseless. It is not a moral failing, and it is a symptom of the failure of our systems. the systems that you see on the screen and many others that we're all responsible for trying to build and strengthen. Once in the homelessness system, exiting it is extremely challenging. Many of the folks we work with don't have identification documents like an ID or a birth certificate, social security card, making it virtually impossible to take any other steps in gaining employment or housing. You need an ID for nearly any step. Navigating the step of getting an ID alone requires completing a stack of paperwork, all with difficult to understand directions, attending meetings, and having an address. Having an address, things easily taken for granted by someone who has never been unhoused. And that's just the beginning of step one in a process with hundreds of steps. It is extremely challenging, such an uphill battle. And all of that is to say really just that homelessness is complex. It requires a village of support to navigate the walk out of the experience of being unhoused. So some other touch points as we're talking about, what is homelessness, what it is and what it isn't. This is not just a Missoula, let me go back. This is not just a Missoula problem. This is national. Homelessness is expected to rise 40% across the country as COVID economic impacts unfurl. Nationwide, 40%. Unfortunately, it's not a surprise and it's very expected. We are hard at work trying to figure out in real time how to create supports in the midst of an unprecedented housing crisis and a pandemic. Like I said, it's complex. We're working on things as we go, learning as we go, and there's a lot to be done, a lot of room for improvement, and also a lot of success to be celebrated. I also want to highlight this concept of perceived homelessness. So much of the experience of homelessness is hidden from public view, just all the time. That's the reality. What we see in public is a tiny fraction of the reality of the experience of being unhoused. Homelessness becomes less visible in the colder months when folks move indoors. So it's times like this right now, when the weather warms and we visibly see more individuals in public spaces, that we get the sense that homelessness is on the rise. Many times, much of that reality is actually just perception. It's explained by the fact that we see homelessness more than we did in the cold months. So that perception versus reality is a really important understanding for thinking about how to address homelessness and trying to do it sustainably and effectively and not in a rushed way. Another concept I want to highlight is housing first. This one you might have heard. Housing first is a framework that stands on the idea that housing is the solution to homelessness. And it's the foundation for our 10-year plan and other efforts, which is why it's more likely to be familiar to folks in the community. The framework values flexibility based on individual needs and circumstances. So again, the fact that each person has a unique history and experience with specific needs, and it's not generalizable. It centers client choice and autonomy. So really understanding folks are the expert of their own experience. They can make decisions about what they need. It advocates for supportive services, and very importantly, that those supportive services are not prescribed and folks have their own personal agency to select supportive services that they want and they need. So not having supportive services be a requirement for access to housing or other needs that folks have. At the end of the day, what we really need is a continuum of options to respond to the continuum of needs. Some folks will not want to live in a traditional house for very valid reasons, and some will do great in that setting. Many folks will have a really hard time transitioning from living in a non-traditional space to a traditional four-walled home. It's a very challenging transition for a lot of people. Some will benefit from supportive services, some won't. We need to be able to meet all of these needs where they are. We need to be able to go out and understand and listen to what the needs are, and then bring those opportunities to our community so that folks can access them where they need them, when they need them in real time. We need safe camping spaces. We need transitional high service spaces. We need permanent supportive housing units. We need more in between and beyond to meet the wide ranging needs of our neighbors. It cannot be generalized. It is an individual solution, and it just requires relationship. So to bridge us to the real heart of this update, the panel of our amazing representatives from our homelessness system, I want to offer this quote from Missoula's very own Becky Bishop, who works for Family Promise in Missoula. Becky says, "We build community by being community." This social challenge takes every one of us, taking time to learn from and engage with our neighbors. It's really important. We can't do this without being a community together. So at this point, I'm going to stop my screen share. I'm going to introduce you. Hold on, I'm getting all my screens pulled up. To our wonderful panelists. So these are amazing people in our homelessness and housing system. They're folks who get creative and come up with new solutions on the regular. It's very impressive, from housing our most vulnerable populations to building lasting partnerships with landlords. So I'm going to invite all of these 7 wonderful panelists to come off of, or to come on to video, show your lovely faces. Awesome. And we'll start with intros. So let's see, pull up the questions. Okay, so the first thing we'll have you all share with everyone is tell us about yourself. How do you like to be identified? Name, pronouns, anything else that's an identifier for you. And what is your professional role? And I'm just gonna go alphabetical order. So let's start with Anna.
Hello, everyone. I'm Anna Nillis. My preferred pronouns are she and her. I am the FUSE Program Development Manager at Partnership Health Center. And FUSE stands for Frequent Users of System Engagement, for those of you that are not familiar with that. And I will do a little bit of deeper dive later on that.
Awesome, thank you, Anna. Alex, you wanna go next?
Hi everyone, I'm Alex Ramsing, he, him pronouns, and I am the landlord liaison with Homeward.
Awesome, thanks, Alex. Oh, I started with Anna, you're not first, Alethea was first. I mixed up the order. Alethea, you go next.
My name is Alethea Standing Rock. I'm with the YWCA Rapid Rehousing Coordinator. She, her, hers.
Thanks, Alethea. And Ashley.
My name is Ashley Corbally. I am the Temporary Safe Outdoor Space Program Coordinator for Hope Rescue Mission.
Thanks, Ashley. And then Councilmember Von Lasberg.
Thanks. Brian Von Lasberg, he, him pronouns. City Council, I've represented Ward 1 for a couple terms here and have served as council president and have intersected a number of the programs and processes that you were talking about during my council tenure.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, Brian. Krista.
My name is Krista Weathers. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the Executive Director of Open Aid Alliance.
Perfect. And Winnie.
Hello, my name is Winnie Lohoff. I am the Path Care Coordinator at Western Montana Mental Health Center. Short synopsis on PATH because it's kind of a bigger thing. PATH works to reduce barriers to housing for people who are experiencing homelessness or imminent homelessness.
Awesome.
Oh, my opponents are she.
Thank you so much to all of you for being here. I really appreciate your time and I'm excited for you all to share more. So let's dive right in. Let's start with, how would you describe your relationship to the homelessness and housing system? And let's start with Winnie.
It's kind of something that I basically every waking moment I'm thinking about. Once you get into this field, it's just like, you're constantly thinking about it. It's hard not to. I mean, on my weekends, my days off, I'm driving around Missoula trying to find new rentals and like slowing down and taking photos of people's houses. It's really not creepy. But yeah, it's mainly a lot of puzzles. Every day is just something completely different and you kind of just have to roll with the punches. It's part adventure, part stress, part just like the best, happiest feeling you've ever felt. It's definitely an amazing experience to be able to be working with it.
Thanks so much, Winnie. Ashley, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I would say definitely part of the solution to the problem here, as opposed to the alternative. And it is a challenging endeavor to navigate the homelessness initiatives and the situations that so many different people are facing. And Emily, you were so right when you say that every situation is so incredibly unique and the factors that led to their experience are so varied and they're complex, and it isn't a one size fits all. And that it really is very much based on relationships. And so that's where we come in with the safe outdoor space, that it is not only round the clock support for folks because we are open 24/7, but it's that ability to have those resources. And we really work on the heart transformation. So we know that finding stable housing for folks isn't an overnight process. In case y'all missed the memo, it takes some time for people. So while we are working through those challenges, we're working on equipping them and resourcing them to really succeed outside after they exit homelessness.
So awesome. Thank you so much, Ashley. And Krista, you want to go next?
Sure thing. Well, I feel like my experience in the homelessness system is kind of unique because our housing program really is a public health intervention. It serves as an intervention to ultimately prevent new HIV infections by keeping people housed so that they can engage in medical care. Now, what I'm really passionate about is taking that same model and applying it across the board because it's just so relevant and it actually really works. So I love that perspective. I also have the unique, I get to support people who are working directly in the system and my staff. I get to support my staff and watch my staff, and it is hard. It is hard work. I say those are like the toughest positions in our whole agency are those housing positions. People work hard and it's emotional and tough stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate the context, Krista. And Alethea, you want to go up?
My relationship with homelessness and the homeless or in the housing system is that I work with families that are experiencing homelessness. Many of the families have really high barriers, and it's not easy to address them at times, or handle like trying to tackle the barriers by yourself. It does take a team of people that are in coordinated entry, which I have used on many times to help coordinate services for families. Yeah. And so just meet the barrier families is pretty cut and dry, simple.
Boiling it down. Brian, do you want to go up next?
Sure. Thanks. From a council member standpoint, we're the policymaking body for the city and a key responsibility relative to the budget and allocating resources. And I think, when I think of council's intersection with the system, I was taking notes on the number of agencies, for instance, in the coordinated entry system. And I've sat on committees reviewing applications through our community development block grant program and home funds. And then those ultimately come before, full council. And so it's often a funding lens and trying to understand how we can most effectively and efficiently deploy the funds that we have to the incredibly complex system and partners that is out there. And I know, personally, that's been one of the key things for me over the years is just getting to know and understand all of the different partners around the table working on these things to try and inform good decisions about where we can support good work.
And there's so many partners to know. Anna, do you want to go next?
Yes. So Fuse is similar to what Krista shared as housing being a public health intervention. It is rooted in the belief that housing is healthcare, or housing is healthcare. And so what we see is we use permanent supportive housing as the intervention to end homelessness and also create health equity within the community, because we identify individuals who are the highest utilizers of the emergency department, interacting with the police, going to jail, using the shelter. And we use the permanent supportive housing as a way to get them off the street and get them into primary care, get them into mental health services. And we see a significant reduction in the utilization of those crisis services. And people are able to maintain their housing with a retention rate of up to 85% within the first year. And as Emily mentioned before, this is a housing first approach. So it is rooted in the belief as well that, you know, people have a choice on what services they want to engage with. So it is all voluntary, and just cannot drive home the point enough that like letting people make their own choices does lead to positive outcomes in their life and for the community.
So important. Thanks for that, Anna. And Alex, you want to round us out?
Yeah, so I think that my role is a little bit different than most folks here. I tend not to work directly with clients except for a class that I teach called RentWise, and then fielding the occasional phone call, helping folks out with applications and things like that. My main goal is to work with landlords who choose to rent to folks with perceived barriers. And I always like to say perceived barriers because I think someone with, you know, a prior felony or something like that could be just as or better than a renter than, you know, a college student who is living away from their parents for the first time. So I work with landlords to help support those folks to keep them in their home. So, you know, if a renter is struggling, you know, struggling to pay rent for a month, you know, either connect the landlord directly with a resource or reconnecting the renters to services or case managers if they've worked with ENI in the past. Yeah.
Thank you all so much. I think your explanations just really highlight how far-reaching this work is. We have, you know, folks working with landlords, folks working directly with people who are unhoused, the funding perspective, we have all of it, interventions. So I appreciate you sharing all of your relationships to it. The next question is, how have you seen the homelessness system evolve or change since you became involved with it? And I recognize you all have different lengths of time involved with the system, but from your own context, however you would answer that question. So Councilmember Von Lossberg, let's start with you this time.
Sure. I think I would highlight the increased level of coordination and partnership. And you mentioned the organizations participating in the coordinated entry system. And I think one of the real eye-opening things for me is attending a couple of those annual workshops when, you know, sitting around the horseshoe, so to speak, or the big square, and hearing from everybody about their involvement and understanding from hearing from various organizations that, you know, the trajectory that has existed and that the groups had come together to work on to increase that level of partnership and coordination. So that's one of the key things that stands out to me.
Thanks so much, Brian. And I'll also add, panelists, if you all hear something that someone else says and you want to respond, feel free to unmute and just jump on in. Krista, we'll go next to you.
Yeah, well, I just want to echo the importance of coordinated entry. I also want to say, you know, most of us don't get paid or get money to participate in coordinated entry. It's a tremendous amount of time and energy, and it's where the magic happens. I would also say value added in that, you know, case managers in this field can just become overwhelmed and feel so lonely. Coordinated entry really helps. Like, we're creating teams, nobody's alone. You can take hard cases to this group and you're going to be supported. So I find tremendous value in it. It's probably my favorite thing in Missoula right now, honestly.
The new hot thing, I love it. Alethea, do you want to go next?
How have you seen the homeless system evolve or change since it became involved with it? When I first started in coordinated entry, it was a little confusing, I have to admit, on how to enter people and how to enter the data. And some of the questions were really challenging, but now they're becoming more trauma informed. And that is helpful for the demographics that we work with. You know, some of the questions could be, you know, question how they would answer it, like if they were going to, you know, it's just a little offsetting a little bit, but now the questions are getting a lot better. There's new assessments going on and more in-depth training. And so that's I just really like it. And that way it's more trauma informed, you know, for the people that we work with.
Thanks, Alethea. And I think you really just highlight the need for our systems to reflect the individuals we work with, and that they need to be fluid. They need to be adaptable because the experience of homelessness is fluid and rapidly changing. And so we try to be reflective in that sense. So thanks for pointing that out. Alex, do you want to chime in?
I sort of feel like I might be the baby of the group when it comes to this. I started about 1 year and 5 months ago or so. So it's, you know, just seeing how this system works, it all feels pretty new to me, even still. I feel like over the last 1.5 years, what I've seen more of is more resources for prevention, especially in a time like right now when prevention is very, very much needed, because all of a sudden anyone at any given time could become a vulnerable renter. So I've definitely seen a lot of work in the prevention side of things, and appreciate everyone's patience while I still learn everything.
Alex, do you mind sharing a little bit more about how the work that you particularly do is intertwined with prevention?
Yeah, so I run a program called the Property Partner Program, although we're kind of, you know, property partners are great. So Property Partner is a landlord or property manager that chooses to reduce barriers for folks who take the RentWise class. At this point too, I'm really here to support any landlord out there. So if a landlord reaches out and says, hey, I have someone who's, you know, car broke down, and they right now have the choice to fix their car to get to work, or maybe need help renting or paying rent that month. My goal at that point is to try and find a resource that would fit in that scenario specifically. So yeah, education and just sort of being that point of contact, because a lot of landlords talk about wanting to do the right thing. I even got a new property partner signed on last week, and the first sentence was, I'm a citizen and I want to do the right thing, which is just like, that's exactly what we're looking for. So, you know, landlords don't want to evict. Eviction is a painful process for everyone involved, more specifically for the renter. So avoiding that at all costs is really, really what it comes down to in my position.
Thanks so much, Alex. Winnie, do you want to share?
So, Alex, I got you by a couple months. I think I'm the baby of this. I was hired in October, so I'm pretty, yeah. So I'm pretty new. I've been here for 6 going on 7 months now. And the biggest thing, like I've been very lucky and I get to be spoiled with the coordinated entry system and the amazing community that's built around it. But the biggest change that has happened during my job here has been the TSOS camp opening. I go out every single Thursday and I do office hours from 1 to 5. So I can sit with my clients. They always know I'm going to be there and they are ready. They're excited to see me. They want to work on housing applications, or you know, someone just got there, they need a phone. Okay, we're going to go to Walmart and buy you a phone. Mental health, great. Okay, fill out this form and we'll get you started with mental health services. It's been able to take this large group of people that have been spread out all over the city and put them in one spot where it is safe, not only for them, but for community partners to be able to go and sit with them and meet them where they're at. I can't tell you how many times I've had clients miss their meeting with me, and it's not because of a fault, like any fault of their own. It's because the bus was late or the bus was super early and they just missed it. And so it's nice to be able to go see my client and not have them to make like the big trek to my office. And then also it just gives them way more access to services, which is really wonderful.
Thanks, Winnie. And Anna.
So when I started out about a decade ago, and I would say the biggest thing was being siloed. I started at front desk staff at the old POG, and it was really difficult. And Krista touched on this, and I know a couple of you other have, but coordinated entry system has really provided that space for people to feel supported in their most difficult cases. And I'm very grateful for that, especially now with the Fuse initiative. It was a fight for resources before, and now I feel like people have a better understanding of what is happening at each agency, and just it helps to humanize the whole process. It helps to humanize the employees at other agencies. It helps to humanize the individuals we're working with, and it also is helping us to move into hopefully the next stage of like really embracing housing first, and recognizing that relationship is the most important foundation we can have with our clients to help them create change in their life and feel safe to make those changes. So seen great changes happening, and I'm grateful for coordinated entry system, I think really bringing those about.
Thanks so much, Anna. And Ashley.
So I have been in the heart of this endeavor only for about a year now in what we're doing, and so I don't have a whole lot of free coordinated entry information to provide. But what I can tell you is that since I've come on, I've seen the collaborations continue to grow. The partnerships and the efforts are far reaching, which is incredible, because as this initiative, our unhoused neighbors, it's a community issue. I mean, it affects all of our community, no matter where you are or who you are or where you live. So it's not something that can be solved by just a handful of people. It requires many, many hands and many, many minds. So to be able to coordinate those, like in the coordinated entry and in HEMIS, to be able to have many, many heads making way on this same individual, you've got a whole army that is fighting for you, which is really amazing for them. Which I can only imagine how less efficient it would have been prior to the coordinated entry system. So I applaud you for implementing that, and that must have been very difficult to get that up and running. And fortunately, there's great training that gets done, and it's very comprehensive and ongoing. So as I continue to navigate it, then I continue to learn. It's just, always learning new things.
I love that. Constant learning. I think that's just our motto for everything we're doing, constantly learning and adapting. Thank you all for your comments on that one. So let's move forward to the next question, which is, what's one success, solution, or win that you've been a part of or are currently working on related to homelessness and housing? And Krista, let's start with you on this one.
I had a feeling, I don't know why, I felt like it was going to be my name. I wanted a minute to think about this. There have been so many, and I feel like we've all just come through this crazy year of so much and so many successes. I think what I'm most excited about right now is, it's still very brand new, but it's this idea of taking this housing model that we've been doing for a long time. And it's taken a long time to build all these support systems. So like you realize that getting housing can actually be, not right now, but sometimes it's the easy part. Keeping housing sometimes is really hard. and then you need all these permanent supportive services wrapped around people. You truly do, to keep people housed for the long term. So I'm really excited to be more involved right now in the Fuse program. It's really taking what we've learned how to do really well in Hopwa, applying our SUD treatment center and behavioral health programming into housing. And it's just like, that's where I really think the future is for, solving homelessness. I really, truly do. It's resource intensive. It requires a lot of people, a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of patience. It's messy, and it works. And so that's the win.
We're glad to have you be a part of it. Ashley, do you want to go next?
Sure. Honestly, everything about the TSOS is really a win. Everything about it has been really incredible for our community and the folks that we can serve that are experiencing that homelessness. So out at the Safe Outdoor Space, while we don't have the inventory to house everybody at this point in Missoula, it's so difficult to find a place that's affordable, or B, that's even vacant, or, as Alex I'm sure understands, to find landlords and places that are willing to do the right thing, to be a good citizen. So it's complex in that nature. But out there, even when we can't house somebody immediately, we are able to meet their other needs, like getting an ID. And Emily, you touched on it earlier, that it is a complex issue, even to fill out an application to request a birth certificate or to request a social security card, which requires the patience of Job to do that. There's a lot of things that need to happen. And for someone who doesn't have an address to even receive any of that mail at, we are able to be that for them. With Hope Rescue Mission sent to our attention, we can get their information for their SNAP benefits established. We can get Medicaid established for them so that they can get connected to healthcare, or get it reestablished if they haven't been in for a while. We're able to then get those identifying documents so that we can go get them a photo ID. We do that probably with somebody, I'm going to say every week, we're taking someone over to get a photo ID. And it is, if anybody has been unhoused for even a short period of time, there's a pretty good chance that their personal effects have been stolen at least once, if not multiple times. So when you don't have a home and a safe place to keep all of your important documents, like your social security card or a birth certificate, like many of us probably do, if it's on you in your possession and then all of your personal effects are taken, it goes with it. So to get those back is quite a challenge. And at the outdoor space, we are able to do that because they are necessary to find employment. Many of our folks out at the Safe Outdoor Space, they want to work. They are willing, they are able-bodied, they are actively seeking employment. But for some of them, even just identification is absolutely a barrier. They have to be able to show that they are who they are to legally work anywhere. And so sometimes that's our first initiative. Of course, it's necessary to fill out a rental application or to assign the lease. I mean, so it's not like you can just do any of those without those basic needs. So because, again, we're open 24/7, we've got peer support specialists that are on site all day and into the night and 7 days a week, being able to work with individuals. And like Winnie mentioned, when you have the opportunity as a case manager to be able to come to a central location instead of trying to find your clients, it allows those clients to be able to access consistent care, which really gets that momentum and that ball rolling. Because if they can only, meet every now and again without any consistency, they really don't move forward. So really everything that we're doing out there has been such a blessing, not just to the staff to be able to watch the transformation inside of them, but be able to offer them the wraparound services that they really need to continue moving forward, just in general in life, and certainly towards housing.
So helpful, Ashley. Thanks for painting that picture and really diving in. I appreciate it. Councilmember, oh, I caught you in the middle of a conversation. Anna, you want to go?
Yes, I will go. One thing that I'm very excited about working on right now is the Cornerstone Apartments. This is a property developed and managed by Missoula Housing Authority, and I've been working with them for over a year now on trying to implement housing first practices there. And currently we have 7 Fuse individuals living there. 4 other individuals who have experienced chronic homelessness are also living there. So it has been quite the lift on all of us, but I think we all agree very worthwhile. We're seeing most people have only been there for about 4 months now, so we can't really give that great of data, but no like returns to jail from what we previously had, and just overall improvements, and just hearing the stories from the tenants on like, oh, now I can work on this, or I want to keep my housing. I'm willing to not do this anymore so I can keep my housing. Has been really eye-opening for all of us, and looking forward to getting their feedback even more to help inform the Trinity project. And very excited to have Open Aid Alliance on board with those supportive services on site because they are very much needed. But yes, very grateful for this opportunity and to build on it for future units.
Thanks so much, Anna. And can you give just a little bit more background on what Cornerstone is? Do you mind giving detail on that?
So Cornerstone was the second phase of the Fuse initiative for Missoula. It was intended to have a mobile support team that would be able to provide supportive services on site. We weren't able to get a full team that really is required to assist individuals in permanent supportive housing, but now we do have more support with Open Aid Alliance joining. But some of the things that make it a little different from other properties would be the background checks. You know, we were able to work with Missoula Housing Authority on maybe getting some people through who might have had traditionally a harder time. And then meeting with the property manager, she really wanted to be able to meet tenants beforehand and get a good idea of who they are, and so they would feel comfortable with her. So that was a part of the application process. And just a little bit more hands-on of like being involved and making sure people understand what it means to sign a lease and what it means to not fill the laundry all the way up because it's free laundry. And Missoula Housing Authority was also able to provide furniture, so they were move-in ready, which has been amazing for our housing navigator, not Lisa Stories, to not have to deal with that piece of moving in. And so just like little tweaks here and there are what can definitely make a difference for someone to get into housing. But as I said, definitely the retention piece is very important to this and is a struggle point, but hopefully with OAA, we will get things a little more structured.
Thanks so much, Anna. Learning as we go. Councilmember Von Lossberg, I'm catching you at a better time now.
Thank you. I should have said a more important job than being on council is being a father of a 9-year-old awesome daughter who was delivering a shake. So apologies. I'm so glad to hear the Trinity Project mentioned. I was thinking of talking about that, and I really want to recognize the great work with the Temporary Safe Outdoor Shelter. Incredible work out there. I wanted to mention the non-congregate shelter and the Sleepy Inn. You cited the numbers in your update, Emily. I think 238 individuals served there, and the 10 people that were helped get permanent housing through that process. A lot of us from different parts of government and services have been meeting weekly and a lot more frequently earlier throughout the pandemic. And, there's always this update around what was going on at the non-congregate shelter and those successes. I can't say enough about when we would hear about people getting housing. And I feel responsibility to also point out that that was a lift, and that decision to do that, to purchase that property and devote it to that use, came amidst some of the most withering opposition I've seen in the community in 7.5 years on council, which, to be really blunt and honest, I'm still kind of reckoning and processing that opposition to what, when the health director here and Adrian Beck, local emergency planning, got before us and said, this is a tool we need to respond to the moment and to the pandemic. you can bet I was going to support that request. But I think it's important to highlight that votes matter in this regard. So I would urge people to remember that. And finally, on that topic, the last part of it that's such a great thing is when it serves its function, when it's done serving this purpose, this is a housing opportunity for the community. So I'm not sure, it's in my top 5 list of things I'm most proud to have supported during my time on council.
Thanks so much, Brian. Your support is invaluable. I really appreciate it. Winnie.
Thank you so much. It seems like every single day I have this excellent success or win, and it's not always like some major thing like getting a client housed. It is, hey, they showed up to their appointment. Oh my God, yes, finally. And they're doing it consistently. Awesome. Other clients, it's their birth certificate finally came in. We ordered it 2 weeks ago, it finally came in. Or, oh my goodness, we navigated the Social Security Administration enough to actually get you a Social Security card. This is crazy. The PATH team it's me, and I'm now training a second person. So it's a 2-person department. And I'm happy that since I started in October, I've been able to house 7 people. And I got the call this morning that I'm getting 2 more of my people housed. So it's going to be nine people total. And it's the best thing when like a property manager calls my client and they're like, hey, yeah, so anyways, you can sign the lease whenever you want. And they're just so nonchalant. And my client's like, yes, it is, being able to be funded enough to pay for a hotel room for someone, being able to bridge people, that is just like, there's big successes and wins, and there's little successes and wins. And I think that's what makes the job so much fun. And it's, I'm a Missoula girl. I am born and raised, and I was raised in this idea that in Montana, no matter who someone is, you don't even have to like them, but you take care of them because they're your community. And being able to meet with community partners and have them be like, explain how stressed they are about someone and show how much that they care. Having clients go above and beyond anything you could have ever imagined. I don't know, that's just something that makes me really love my community. And I think that's just a success on its own. Yeah, there's like some of the most stressful parts in this job, and then all of a sudden you get a mini success and you're like, everything's fine. But yeah, it's good. It's lovely.
Such an important call out. That's so much of the work that's done in this system is the tiny wins. Thanks for highlighting that. Alex, you want to take it?
Sure. So a little more context behind the Property Partner Program. It took us a couple months to get everything ready, what it was, what it wasn't. And the launch date of the Property Partner Program was March 1st, 2020, which, as it turned out, was a terrible time to launch a project like this. So it was definitely kind of slow going at first, but every single landlord that has signed on to become a property partner has just felt like this monumental win. And momentum has been picking up a lot lately. There has been a lot of more word of mouth. So if any of those 72 attendees that are out there right now know of a landlord that might want to help out, please send them my way. So that's really felt like a massive win. And like I mentioned, we hit our 13th person last Thursday, which was really great. And the other side of things too, the other massive win is whenever a landlord reaches out for help. Having a landlord that cares about their tenant enough to reach out to me feels like a pretty big win, instead of the landlord being like, figure it out, saying, hey, someone lost their job, what can we do? And then provide that resource just always feels like a big win on the other side of that same coin.
Thanks so much, Alex. So grateful to have you there to support the landlords in those situations. And Alethea, you want to round us out?
A win for me is when I coordinate between 3 agencies for a family that has a debt, and we're able to meet that need, and the family is housed. Another win, I think, for me is that I am in a subgroup for coordinated entry on the Centralized Housing Solution Fund. And we discussed the perimeters of the fund and what it can be used for. And I take that as a win because we problem solved and we come up with a variety of different solutions and ideas on ways the funding can get spent, and we have to be creative in ways that it will link the person into housing or how to maintain their housing. And that is such a big part of coordinated entry, I believe, is overcoming barriers and having that fund available for people that need to access it.
Yeah.
Oh, also, sorry.
Go for it.
I forgot, I just read the top part and I'm like, I'm done. Also, a win is the opening of the Meadowlark here, which you've already mentioned, Emily. And they have the 2 shelters with the domestic violence shelter and the family housing center. I believe it's 172 beds that we have here. And so it is, it's beautiful. The building is so beautiful. And talking with the few residents that we have now, you know, they're like, we love the building. It's so beautiful. It's so spacious. And, you know, are you comfortable? Yes, we're very comfortable. And so just to see the weight has been lifted off of the few participants that we have in now, just, you know, they're calmer and they're not like so high strung, you know, like being in unsecured housing is very stressful, and, you know, you don't know where you're going or what's going to happen, and you can't really make plans. And now that is definitely a big possibility for them, and I'm excited.
Thank you so much, Alethea. Just shows the importance of dignified and stable solutions. Really thankful that we have the Meadowlark now. Okay, next question. Where would you say the gaps are in our homelessness and housing system? And let's start, Winnie, with you.
I love this question. I love all of these questions. They're so wonderful. This is like my favorite thing to talk about at this point. So the gaps that I see in our housing and homelessness system are the major property management companies in Missoula. A lot of them, well, we have a couple major ones here, and some of them have been absolutely wonderful. Recently, I had a wonderful company allow one of my clients to move in, even though their policy is to not take permanent supportive housing vouchers. They're still giving her a chance, and that is absolutely amazing. On the other hand, I've had property management companies say, I am flat out not going to rent to you, or well, to your client, because they are homeless. And I don't care that you're coming with money in hand. I don't care that they have extra services. I'm just not going to rent to them. And that to me is incredibly heartbreaking. And, you know, I've gone to the point where, because of my program, I can offer up to a triple deposit and they won't take it. And, you know, I would love to see community partners or city officials, you know, start making policies that would make it harder for property management companies to do that. There's this arbitrary rule in a lot of applications that are, you know, you have to have 2 to 3 times the rent, or need to be making 2 to 3 times the rent in order to live at a place. And, you know, for a lot of people in Missoula, that's just not possible. So, you know, it's a gap, but it's a gap that we can fix. And I like to look at it like that, because otherwise it just feels too sad for me. But yeah, I mean, I guess that gap also allows for our little wins or our big wins to just be even a little bit bigger.
Thanks so much, Winnie. Alethea, you want to share?
Yeah, I do. I just want to start off as like the first part of the 10-year plan is prevention and rapid rehousing, and is bringing people out of shelters into permanent supportive housing, or into permanent housing. I just, I really agree with that. And I really agree with the housing first model. The second part of that, the 10-year plan, is the housing first. And I really love that idea because it goes along with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I love that. The first two, are psychological needs and safety needs. And I have seen participants, come in and they're very they lack some confidence, and they get into housing and you just see them grow. You just see them building relationships with their neighbors and with their property managers and with their children and with themselves. And it's really inspiring to see so many families that come from, having without a place to call their own, to having all this stuff and all this, move into their own home, and they grow. And it's exciting and amazing to see. And I don't think there is really a gap in our homeless system. There is definitely a gap in our housing system when the barriers are too high, or the affordable rent is way too high above fair market rent or rent reasonable. And that is an issue, with itself. This works, like the whole housing first, it works for all of us because we can see the practicality of being housed first. But when the participants don't have verifiable income and they are getting denied, it's hard to keep them engaged and motivated to keep looking for housing. Part of our position, and it's not really advertised, is spreading hope that they will find housing and that they will get into housing. And you may be denied 10 times. I have clients that have been denied almost by every single property manager here. And it's because of credit scores and affordable housing. A lot of the affordable housing has barriers that are way too high. And like you said, you have to make 3 times the amount of the rent. And so who is that really affordable to? It's affordable for the higher income brackets of our area. And it's not affordable to the people that actually need the housing, that need safe and affordable housing. And that's where the gap is. We need to spread awareness that, a lot of the people that are experiencing homelessness are not a stereotype. They're not, set by other people's version of what homelessness looks like. This is a wide, from single young individuals to the elderly, and to families and grandparents and uncles and aunts raising, other family members. And it's a wide area, and they definitely need safe housing and affordable housing. And some of the rents are just way too high, and we can't use our program money. That it's not with the funding. There's so much funding out here. There was a lot of funding and vouchers. And if the barriers were high, we would be housing people just left and right, And unfortunately, it's not that. And so if they would lower the barriers, we'd be happy to help you fill out the lease and everything.
Thanks so much, Alethea. Thanks for highlighting that. It's definitely a big challenge in the work that we're doing. Krista, do you want to share?
Yeah, so I've been doing this work at Open Aid Alliance for about 12 years now. And about halfway through, I hit kind of a low point where I just felt really discouraged, and watching people in and out of housing can get really hard. And so there was this one individual in particular who I've worked with for almost all of those years, and he has been like literally blown out every housing option we could possibly find. And when you see that happen repeatedly, you know, even when you're committed, you're like, Jesus, you know, like how much money can we keep throwing at this person? Or how many landlords will we find who will rent to this guy? So then, you know, it hits me that like what's happening is that we're failing individuals like this because there's not appropriate housing for them, right? So they don't belong in the housing units that are available and that we can rent for them. What we need, and I'm really passionate about this because we serve people who are actively using drugs, you know, is housing for people who are actively using substances or actively, you know, having mental health crises. Like, not on the you know, there's recovery housing. What we need is active, supportive housing for people who are struggling with substance use.
Thanks so much, Krista. I wonder if you might paint a bit of a picture for folks who maybe haven't conceptualized that before or imagined it of what that would even look like.
Well, it looks, you know, again, it looks messy, but that's harm reduction. When I use the term harm reduction, it's talking about reducing the harm associated with substance use, drug use. It's not eliminating it, but it's really working with it. So it might look like, you know, someone is housed, but their alcohol use is managed somewhat in agreement. There are limits. It doesn't mean there's no limits. It doesn't mean that there are no rules. It just means that there's a safe space. And then that space can't be ripped away with every mistake that's made, right? So the policies are in alignment. The neighbors are in alignment. There are adequate support resources, but housing also isn't dependent on abstinence or, you know, the goals really are up to the individual. And if the goal is to never stop using substances, you still house them. But in the end, it saves our community countless, I would say, tertiary harms that come from not housing individuals like this. So I say it's a huge gap. What we don't have is appropriate housing. We are failing these individuals miserably by continuing to try to put them in standard housing situations.
Thanks. I think you really speak to that, the concept Anna highlighted of housing as healthcare, and then the concept I mentioned earlier of this continuum of options and really meeting people where they are. So thanks for bringing that. Alex.
I'm trying to think of what I can possibly add on to what Alethea and Krista have just said. Not just housing stock in Missoula, but right housing stock in Missoula for the right people. I mean, this year especially has been very challenging finding homes for people without perceived barriers. I know of at least 4 couples who have, you know, had their leases end because the landlord well, housing market's great, I'm selling the place. Or last week I got an email, my friend's having their rents doubled. You know, having housing available for everybody is tricky, but very needed, especially in a time of a pandemic. And right now, I think the last numbers that I got were sitting at 0.94% vacancy rate. So it's just nothing. There's just nothing available right now. And I think another thing to add to, you know, especially for folks at home too, watching this, you know, there are opportunities to help folks out there, you know, depending on how much time that you have to give. There's a great organization called the Missoula, or the Housing Advocate Network in Missoula, that does a lot of great work. Everyone here works so incredibly hard with the clients that they work with. For the folks that, you know, maybe aren't in those programs but still need that extra assistance, that's available for folks as well, and so important. And it could be anything from just helping with applications to, you know, going with them to actually meet landlords for the first time. So it's, you know, there's stuff that everyday Missoula citizens can do as well. That's very needed and kind of helps fill in some of those gaps, which I think right now Zeke, who runs the Housing Advocate Network, has just said that he's got a 2-week waiting, or he has a waiting list for the first time in 2 years that he's run that program. He has a wait list and he has over 40 volunteers. So if you're at home and thinking, I should do something, well, there's something for you to do.
Thanks, Alex. And that wait list, to be clear, is for folks who need advocates. So there is a need. Yeah, and it's a really great program in our community. Thanks for bringing that up. Ashley.
You know, it's really, there's not a lot to say that hasn't already been said, so I'll echo most of that. It's a complex issue. We see a lot of barriers with folks when they have vouchers that'll cover 100% of their rental costs. They've got double and triple deposit funding. They've got all the resources. So financially, there's not a lot of risk for a property owner or someone that agrees to rent. The financial part is taken care of. But they'll say, the rental agencies and property managements will say, well, you don't have recent rental history, so we're not going to rent to you. Well, of course I don't. I live in the streets. I would love to have a rental history, which is why I'm applying here. So understanding that is the very real nature, or they'll look and you know, and I say this with the caveat of, I've been a landlord, I've been a tenant, I've been a homeowner, I've been all the things. So I've seen it from all the different perspectives. They'll say you don't have good credit. Well, if you lose your job and you lose your income and you're unable to pay maybe a couple of your past bills and your credit takes a tank and you're still not working and now you're unsheltered and you don't have a house, then it really just compounds the issue. So now you don't have a stable place to live. And if you do leave your place to try and seek employment, to try and find an income, you come home and to your home, whatever that looks like, and your personal effects have been ransacked and they've been gone through and they've taken whatever few possessions you may have still had. And so you're in an even worse position just by trying to be employed. Right. So then, so you don't have an income and therefore you can't use it responsibly even to rebuild your credit. So it's not just you have bad credit, you're a bad person. It's not about moral failure. It's complex in nature. So I think one of the gaps is just education, public education, education for those that would desire to do the right thing, but aren't really sure about the risks associated with it. And then Alex, I think what you're doing is great with the landlords and being able to, you talked about them being able to meet some of their tenants ahead of time. And that's incredible. Being able to humanize them, because it's super easy to just say, you don't check all of our pre-established boxes on the application. And so therefore you're not a good fit to stay here. Right. But again, being part of the solution and not part of the other side of it is saying, I understand that there's a very real situation. And if I don't want to be part of the solution and all I want to do is complain about it, but I'm not willing to do anything in the meantime, that's not a place I want to be in. And that's not an organization that I want to be part of. So we're trying to do what's right. And I think education is part of that. And building those relationships is a big gap. And for the landlords to understand that they may have, we do find barriers with criminal history. You know, they might have a felony conviction. And honestly, it might have been a conviction from decades before. You know, has anybody ever made mistakes in their life? Anybody? Just me? Okay, right? We've all made mistakes and sometimes they loom over us for decades, but that doesn't, again, lead because you're a personal moral failure. You made stupid mistakes, but if that's something that's going to stay on your criminal history for your lifetime, like, let's understand and have some grace and be able to understand the context of what things are in, to be able to provide the most effective solutions to our community members, because they are our community members, and all of it affects all of us.
Very well said, Ashley. Thank you. Anna.
I agree about the appropriate housing. I think with that appropriate housing, we also need the appropriate supportive services. And so that is definitely a gap as far as retention is concerned. And agencies need the capacity to be able to take on those supportive services and deliver them in a way that will meet clients where they're at and what they're needing. So I'll keep it brief to that.
I'm going to actually ask you to expand real quick.
Okay.
I was meant to ask this earlier and I forgot to ask it, and you just gave me the perfect intro to do it. So if you can do it somewhat concisely, this is a big bag, but we keep using this term supportive services. And I think that's another one of these industry terms that we all understand, but maybe the broader community might not. So can you just paint a little bit of a picture of what we mean when we're talking about supportive services?
Yes, supportive services can be a lot of different things, but I think some of the main ones, like for instance at Cornerstone, we have a case manager who would work with folks on site. So that would cover like figuring out how to ride the bus if someone doesn't know how to ride the bus, getting their food stamps set up. Oh man, so many things. So I'll skip over that. Also maybe having like a behavioral health clinician on site. That's something that permanent supportive housing places have on site. Peer support is huge, and that can lead into assisting people learning life skills and how to live in their apartment. Employment services, getting connected to a benefit specialist because they do need to apply for Social Security. And I think you're trying to think if I'm missing anything.
Anyone else wants to chime in?
Yeah, anyone else? And for ideally for permanent supportive housing, you know, you have this team that has a peer support, has a case manager, has a behavioral health clinician that's also trained in substance use, maybe even has a registered nurse who can go in and do like blood pressure checks and other very important health checks so that they don't have to go into a clinic. So it's like really just having all those people right there so that someone can walk out their door and access those services. Sorry, Wendy, I thought you were going to say something.
Oh, Winnie, I think something weird happened with your speaker. Still sounds wonky. I'm going to let you fix that for a second. I'm going to go to Councilmember Von Lasberg and then we can come back to you.
Yeah, I quickly, so Ashley, so many mistakes, I can't begin to count them that I've made, and my daughter loves hearing about them. There's gaps all over the place, and I think one of the things I've learned over the years, this is one of the many opportunities where, you know, one of the best things I can do is shut up and listen, because all of you have identified, you know, really crucial, important gaps. I would, and I think, you know, we're going to try to work those. Krista, your point about, you know, appropriate housing really resonates. The challenges Winnie and others have mentioned with landlords. And I'm hopeful, you know, that we're going to be able to do some things. We've got some substantial money now within the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and some great projects coming on that we've talked about via like Trinity and just housing stock. And we're, you know, and seriously, we're also going to have to redouble our efforts to find ways to work beyond just the local government level at the state level, and see what we can do there. This has unfortunately been an experience this session where it seems that there's a pride in and an amusement in not helping, to put it mildly, communities like Missoula. And we're going to have to work with our state representatives locally to find ways to change that dynamic. It's untenable for future years. There's a lot that we can do here locally, but we need partners at every level of government. So I want to mostly say thank you to the people who are identifying, like you all, these kind of gaps. These are the things we need to hear and listen to.
Thanks so much, Brian. Winnie, I want to throw it back to you real quick. If your microphone's fixed, and Alethea, I see you have your hand raised.
Can you hear me now? Does this work?
Ken. Yep.
Yay! Cool. Okay. I was just jumping off of what Anna was saying about like support services. I view that also as like making a community for them. It's not only the mental health professionals, case management, stuff like that. That is so incredibly important. That is clients who are terrified of going to the hospital for some reason or another, they will refuse to go to the hospital until they need to get their finger cut off. I had personal experience with one of my clients who did that. So that kind of support is really important. But also, community partners in the sense of like Zootown Arts Community Center is really excited to be starting a program specifically for, Zach and myself, we're working on building a program for the homeless so that they can feel like they can come into the community center and do art. They can use the recording system and make podcasts or music. They can sit and just kind of relax and feel like they're part of the community. And that's such a big extra part of support services.
So important. Thanks for that, Winnie. I'm excited to see what that looks like. And Alethea, I see you have your hand raised. Do you have a quick add-on?
I do. It just kind of goes with what Anna and Winnie both have said, that the people being referred for vouchers is a fantastic idea and referral. But if they don't understand how to maintain their housing, they're not going to stay in housing. We need some kind of program, much like the TSOS camp, but for people that have been referred for vouchers, so we can start working with them while they're in a safe and hopefully possible sober if they were willing to, go into recovery or go into some kind of counseling or program specifically for veterans, the disabled, and the elderly. We don't have housing like specifically for the disabled and the elderly, and unfortunately they do get victimized. And it's it'd be nice to see them into some kind of safe housing while they wait for permanent housing if they're referred for a voucher, or some of the elderly if they're applying for like assisted living and they're waiting for an opening to get them into there. And that's much like, as Anna's doing. But something a little bit more bigger, and then we can work with them with getting them with classes with Alex and Winnie and Anna and getting their needs met. Because there's a time limit, you have to get all your information in. And I had to personally, we couldn't get the information back from Social Security, and so by the time he got the information for his voucher, we had to appeal the decision because he was denied, we didn't get the information in on time. And sometimes it's a long process, sometimes it's not, it's just dependent on the person and the family. That's all I had to add on to that.
Yeah, thank you so much for highlighting that. All right, our last question, and I'm going to ask everyone try to keep it like a minute or two, but also if you have important things to say, which you all do, please say them. So what do you wish the larger Missoula community better understood about the work that you do? And Ashley, let's start with you on this one.
I think I've echoed it quite a bit, really. I really wish that they would understand the complexity of the problem, and that it isn't, it's not that folks want to be unhoused. That's not really the situation. They want to be in a stable place they live. They're humans like you and me, and their sons and daughters and their moms and dads. They have hopes and dreams. They have a background and a story, and many of them have a story that I promise you would tear you at the depth of your soul when you hear it, right? These are folks that have gone through, more often than not, a significant amount of trauma, significant. And that really impedes their ability to think the same way that maybe many of us do. Many of us that grew up, Emily, you talked about at the beginning, maybe it's a fairly stable home with two parents and no substance use or abuse or anything, and had the opportunity to go to college, is very different from someone who was born into a home of addicted parents, and different from someone who rummaged through garbage cans at 3 years old to feed themselves, right? It's a different situation. So understanding that the complexity is there, and that it takes a lot of compassion and grace to be able to work through those, to get people to a better place.
Thanks so much for that, Ashley. Alex.
Big sigh for the big long sigh for this question. I feel like there's a lot of misconception about what my position is among the landlords. I think maybe a lot of landlords might think that my position is here to strong arm them, or to beg, or to say, well, you signed on, so now you have to take on this person. My job at the end of the day, full stop, is to support landlords. That is my job. I am here as a resource for landlords. And something that COVID has just blasted wide open is that everyone can be an at-risk renter at any given moment. Something major can happen, and a tenant that you've had for years might all of a sudden lose their job, might lose a family member, might lose something major. And the goal of my position is to be there to support landlords, to support their tenants, so that we can keep people in their homes. Or to, you know, what Winnie was saying earlier, that the property management company that just, you know, triple deposit, whatever, but I will not rent to someone that's homeless. And that's so frustrating for me to hear, because that's exactly the type of landlord that's like, but, you know, you have the landlord liaison program that's here to support you. If something goes wrong, then I can reconnect them with services. So I think, yeah, like I said, big long sigh for this question, just letting people know that I am here to support landlords.
Clear message needed to be shared. Thank you, Alex. Krista, you want to share?
I would share, this is probably for our housing program, maybe the gaps I spoke about, or maybe our syringe service program. You know, often questions, comments that we get involve the word enabling. Isn't that enabling? And I would say, yes, it is enabling people to stay alive. So that's the seed that I would plant for all this work. For every single panelist on here, whether it's Councilman von Lossberg voting for the Sleepy Inn or whatever it is, I would say all these people are enabling folks to stay alive.
Such an important message. Thank you, Krista. Anna?
Yeah, I can't agree more with Krista, especially with some of the events that have happened this week with some of our community members. But I think it's also important for the community to recognize that we aren't trying to preach and say, like, just be a good person. The solutions that we are suggesting are evidence-based, and they have worked in other communities. So it's not just a bunch of people up on a soapbox trying to get their way, although sometimes I feel like I am doing that. But yeah, it's really an effort to, like, make our community a safe place for all people, and that we really are trying to juggle that safety piece for everyone in the community, whether you have housing or you don't have housing.
Thanks so much, Anna. Councilmember von Lossberg.
Thanks, and I'm going to use that enabling line a lot now, so thank you, Krista. Homelessness is complex. It requires a village of support. Those might have been on a slide earlier in the presentation. And as others have said, well, a predecessor of mine on council wrote something in the listserv once about sort of challenging people when they encountered someone experiencing homelessness to, sort of check their reaction. And he didn't say it exactly this way, but not to focus so much on the things that they were seeing associated with that, but to see a human being in need. And that's stuck with me.
Thank you, Brian. Alethea?
What I would like the Missoula community to know is that the YWCA, we help survivors of domestic violence, men, women, they, them. And we help families of all shapes and sizes with housing in our family housing center. And that, like we've all said, there's a variety of reasons why people enter homelessness or experiencing homelessness, and we are trying to find a solution to help these families out of homelessness. So that's all I want to say about us.
Thanks so much. And Winnie, I think you're our last one on this one.
I think I would have to say for the larger community, is please understand that they're trying. We're trying, and we get to be the kind of annoying faces that people are hearing being like, please rent to my client. But at the end of the day, it is our client who is trying. They're the ones who are reading the ugly comments under Missoulian articles. They're the ones hearing you say that you don't like them. But they're also the ones who are hearing you when you say, I give you a chance. And, giving basic compassion to someone who, may be emotionally escalated, may be scared. Emotional support for them is you leaving them alone. You may be calling the mobile support team or the hot team, helping them, get the services that they need, or just giving them their space. I look at it as, how would I want my own child to be treated? How would I want to be treated when I am just like at my absolute worst? And, doing that within reason, of course, but just giving that compassionate, pure love to someone, even if you're not talking to them, just smiling when they are doing their sign on the highway or at Target. That's a recognition of their personhood. They're not the other. They are people who, just lost their kids because they're homeless, because of XYZ. They're not trying to be homeless. They just need a little bit of extra love.
A great way to finish us out. Thank you. We are at the end of our questions and we're getting close to the end of time, but I want to just open it up one more time to see if anyone has anything else they want to add before we wrap the panel.
I just quickly wanted to say thank you to everybody else on the panel, but Emily, we're really fortunate to have you in the community at the city in your role. Your predecessor, Teresa, was outstanding. We're fortunate to still have her at the city, and I'm so excited to have you on board, so thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Anything else anyone wants to add before we wrap the panel? I do have like 1 or 2 more slides to just wrap us up after this. Okay, well, I want to give the biggest thank you to all of you. The idea of doing a 2-hour panel or 2-hour presentation where I just talk sounds terrible. So I'm so grateful that you all were willing to come and share your experiences and talk to the community. You're all amazing. And I'm so thankful for the work you do. And I'm so thankful for the time you give today. So thanks for being here. And I'm just going to turn us back over to screen share for a quick minute to wrap us up. Sharing screen. Okay, so what's next? That's likely the question on people's minds as we look towards the end of our 10-year plan, which is next year. And the answer is we're figuring it out. There is no clear path from here. There is no directive to create a new 10-year plan. There is an importance to listen and evaluate, a lot of what we did today, hearing what's going on, hearing where the gaps and the solutions are. So an evaluation process is likely in development. We're kind of thinking through what that would look like to assess the successes, assess the needs, assess opportunities as we end the 10-year plan and look ahead from there. We're looking at, like I spoke in the beginning when I was showing the phases we're in, we're looking at sustaining. We're looking at reflecting on gaps. We're looking at advancing successes. We're really trying to transform our system. We're trying to change the way we think and talk about the experience of being unhoused. And that is heavy and deep work and requires a lot of conversation with a lot of people, and really hope to engage the community quite a bit in this stage of the work to really point us in the next direction. Like I've said many times, you've heard our panelists share, the experience of becoming unhoused is fluid and rapidly changing. And we dream of a system that reflects that. It reflects the fluidity through a stable continuum of solutions. So that's really broadly what we're aiming towards, and more tangibly, we're figuring out the direct steps to get there. So with that, I will say my most sincere thank you to everyone who chimed in for offering your time and attention to our work and being part of how we address homelessness as a community moving forward. As I like to say, engaged community members is where the magic happens. So thank you for being one of those engaged community members. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being a part of our community and therefore being a part of what we're working towards. And my information is on the screen. Again, I'm Emily Armstrong, she, her pronouns. I'm the Reaching Home Manager. And you can access me by email or by phone number. I am always happy to be a resource. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your Tuesday.